All right, what's up, everybody? So today we have a special guest. We've got Justin from Debug Your Brain. As you guys may know, he's very famous for debunking Joe Rogan with his crop death though video. He does a lot of street outreach. He posts a lot of really well edited, thorough videos on his YouTube channel. And yeah, we're happy to have him on the channel here today. So Justin, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. I'm also a fan of your content. We've chatted a lot offline or on Instagram at least. Yeah, so I mean, you kind of give a pretty good summary there. I'm an animal rights activist. I'm a vegan, or that's at least how I would describe myself. And I do a lot of YouTube, a little bit of Instagram, mostly vegan activism. Every once in a while, there's like something in there that's not exactly vegan activism, but mostly vegan activism. So things like outreach. I do a lot of video essays where I try to take like a topic and sort of put either a really unique twist on it, or B, cover a topic that people have covered before, but in a way that I think is maybe more understandable to people. You know, so those are kind of the sorts of things that I do on there. I also do some interviews and some fun stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, that's cool you mentioned that though. What would you say is like a little unique thing, a unique twist that you add on to some already established concepts?
Yeah, so I mean, well, the crop dust one, since that's, that's what we're talking about. I think a big one is, whenever there's the crop dust argument is brought up to vegans will say something like, well, animals eat crops, or they'll say something like, 70% of soy or 77% of soy is fed to animals or something like that. And interestingly, I think alone, the fact that 77% of soy is fed to animals doesn't actually prove the point, because it could just be that like we could live in a world where soy was perfectly converted calorically, like into animals. And so they could be eating 70% of it and still like, there could be a perfect conversion of those calories. And so the point is the real underlying phenomenon that matters here is that the calories aren't converted efficiently.
Gotcha.
And so there could be 10% of soy fed to animals. It would still be inefficient and it would still be causing more crop deaths. So it doesn't really matter what that number is. And also there too, something that I haven't seen vegans address is things sort of happen in waves. So first vegans come on the scene and they're like, you're killing animals. Everyone's like, I don't really have a good argument. Then someone comes out with crop deaths, right? And they say, oh, well, what about the crop deaths? And then vegans say, well, you cause more crop deaths, And for a while there, that seemed to be that's the end of it. But if you actually go on to like, anti-vegan spaces and stuff, they have a comeback for that. And that's, well, they're mostly eating, the leftovers or the waste
the
products.
86% or something.
The 86%, right?
Yeah.
And I hadn't seen many vegans actually address that, because a lot of them would say like, yeah, 70% of the soy is fed to animals. And it's like, well, depending on how 70% is fed and then 84% of that is waste product, if that's all like you can imagine scenarios where it's like, oh, wow, this is really efficient to feed animals crops, And so like, I think I wanted to address that, especially since in the paper itself, it's like, it says it like 2 sentences later, So like that's like one thing where I like wanted to dig in because I hadn't seen other people really dig into it. And also to the other thing, there was also like a misunderstanding there, because I did a poll and I even asked some people I knew, because I was like, so 84% is waste product, but it still takes 3 times the amount of, human edible feed to get, 1 gram of, I think it takes 3 kilograms of human edible feed fed to animals to get out 1 kilogram of human edible animal, right?
Yeah.
So there's this 3-to-1 ratio, but also it's 84% is waste products. It's like, how does that make sense? Like this seems like a contradiction,
Yeah.
And so I ran that by a bunch of people. I was like, does that seem like a contradiction, or do you understand how that could be the case? And most people were confused about how that could be the case. Like I did a poll and a lot of people said they were confused. A lot of people said they understood, but then you also have to take a portion of those people who said they understood and realize that either some of them are like just wishful thinking, and some of them actually just don't realize that they understand. Like, so I was a teacher and a tutor for a long time, and
gotcha.
And people thinking they understand things is like the like the death knell of their grades in a class.
Completely. Explain it back to me.
Yeah, exactly. You tell me.
That's the check.
Yeah, and it's
that's crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting in research. One of the biggest predictors of getting good grades in school is not intelligence, it's metacognition, which is your ability to know what you know. So people with high metacognition, they understand what they understand, and they also understand when they don't understand something. And that's the predictor of grades, because then you actually have an accurate representation of how prepared you are for a test, because you actually know that you don't know. I went to college with this guy, and dude, he was like the Dunning-Kruger effect made manifest. He was so confident that he knew stuff. You know what I mean? He's like, oh, this is going to be easy. He's like, oh yeah, I got this. And I was like, how long did you study? He's like, oh yeah, like an hour and a half last night. And I don't know what, it depends on what major, what college you go to. But in my college, an hour and a half of studying for like a biology or a chemistry test, like that wasn't going to cut it. Like it was not going to cut it. Like, I don't care how smart you were. Like that wasn't, it wasn't going to work. And, you know, then he'd get back and he'd get like a C- or a D or something. And I'm like, bro, I thought you knew it. I thought it was easy. Like, what's going on? You know? So, that's something. Yeah. Anyway, so just to bring it back, like when I was looking at those polls, I was still seeing 50% admitting they didn't understand, 40% allegedly understanding. And I ran it by my girlfriend too, and she's good at math. Like she is probably better at math than I am. And she was like, wait, what? And then I explained it to her and she was like, that's still confusing. I'm like, you're right. It is still fucking confusing. Like, and so it's actually quite hard to describe in words, which is why in the video I do like this whole like diagram where like I break it down and I explain it like 6 different ways. And it's still tough to understand. It's a weird concept, like layering percentages and absolute values and like meshing them together. But yeah, so that like I was like trying to do that. I was like, no one's ever done this. It's not easy to understand. A video format is the best way to address this. Totally. And so I'm like, I'm gonna fucking try it. It's very ambitious to describe this. And I hope that people can walk away and like maybe understand this a little better, you know?
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, cool. It really explained in a way that I hadn't thought about before. And I didn't know that you used to be a tutor and teacher. So that explains a lot. Yeah. I'll ask you a little bit about that later. So before that, could you tell us a little bit about your vegan journey? Like how you even became vegan in the first place?
Yeah, it's interesting because like there's like these more like proximate events, obviously, that I think everyone associates with becoming vegan. But, you know, trying to plumb the depths there, it's like, oh, there are these more like distal events further back in my history that sort of planted those seeds, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
I think those are interesting to reflect on. So, you know, if someone were just asking me this is what happened. During the pandemic, I was watching a lot of YouTube. I watch debates. I think debates are really interesting. A lot of times I watched atheist debates, but I'll also watch like any hot button political issue, you know, like trans
you watch
stuff.
That Cosmic Skeptic.
Yeah, Cosmic Skeptic, exactly. But Cosmic Skeptic actually...
R.I.P.
Yeah, actually, he's there's an interesting thing that happened recently. He actually was on this podcast called Trigonometry, and he was talking about veganism, and I might do a video about that before. Yeah, we'll leave that, but it was interesting. Okay. It was interesting what happened. Yeah, so like I would, you know, and I watch all across the political spectrum too, as far as like debates and stuff. And I just like really like getting into like the nitty gritty, understanding exactly what the other side thinks, what the extremes think, how they like mesh up, you know, when they get together. Yeah. So I just love all that. And so, you know, I was just watching debates. So vegan debate comes up. I have no reason not to watch it. It's just like, it's like right in my wheelhouse. Here's like a sort of niche thing. Cool. Let's watch it. Right. It's Earthling Ed. So I watch it and I'm like, oh, that was actually pretty fun, you know, pretty fun debate. So I watch a couple more and I keep watching them and I'm like, damn, like, obviously this is his content, right? But these people are still just getting bodied on the street. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so the thing, which is fine, like man on the street interviews, like obviously this person is coming in very prepared. This person doesn't have as much, right? But usually when someone gets destroyed in like a street interview, it's almost always because the person who's prepared has a lot more empirical data at their disposal. You know what I mean? Like you're arguing about something factual, but like factually based. Yeah. And you come in and you're like, oh, I didn't know that like solar panels were actually worse than wind turbines or something like that. Totally. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, on the street, I'm like, okay, I don't have that. And so like, if it was something like environmental or health related, like, yeah, I can understand that Earthling Ed is going to have sources at his disposal. But that wasn't where they were failing. That was interesting to me. It was on these like very basic questions. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
Testing their own consistency. Mm-hmm. And so that happened. And the other thing I noticed was that, okay, like I, as well as I can, I feel like I have a decent judge of someone's intelligence after just watching them talk for 5 to 10 minutes. Like I feel like I can get like a read on it about how smart they are. And I was watching these videos and I was like, these reasons are far too dumb for how smart this person seems. Like this person's intelligence is here and the reasoning they're using to defend their carnism, which I wouldn't have said carnism at the time, obviously, is like in the fucking basement. It's in the floor.
Yeah, it's in the gutter.
And so when there's this big mismatch, to me, what that's saying is, ooh, like that's a red flag that there's an emotional blockage there, that there's a protective
Gotcha.
mechanism coming into play.
Okay.
And so I'm watching these and I'm like, wow, all these people are like, seem to really be throwing up protective mechanisms. They're just like a huge mismatch between like intelligence and the reasoning ability in this realm.
Yes.
And but that made me question myself. I was like, ooh, okay. So like,
this is before you're vegan, right? This is before you're vegan. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, ooh, am I doing the same thing? And so like I ran through his arguments and I was like, what would my answers be to these arguments? And I was like, well, I don't really have, and at the time, and maybe even still, like I would say I could present some arguments, right, against it that would like give me some buffer or something. But the point is like my arguments were significantly worse than the pro-vegan arguments. Like whatever anti-vegan argument I had was just like notably worse to me than like the pro-vegan arguments. And so I'm like, and I remember I walked downstairs at one point. This is during the pandemic, so like me and my girlfriend just in the same house with our dog. And oh no, we didn't even have a dog, man. It was just me and her. And I just walked downstairs and I was like, fuck. I was like, I think I might go vegan. Like I was like pissed off about it. You know, I like very begrudgingly said it, but I just felt like I had been like, you know, put into like a sort of logical and ethical like armbar. You know what I mean? I was like, I don't really see a way that I can, you know, keep justifying this. So
100%. And it's funny how you mention hearing people who seem pretty smart saying arguments that you're like, dude, even you can't believe that. Like even you can't, you know, I'm sure you're not walking away being like, that was my best work. And back in the day, so Vegan Gaze once was, I heard her say when she watches street outreach videos or people talking and engage with people about veganism, something that really stuck with me that she said was a lot of the times it's these people's first time ever, you know, engaging with the concept of veganism, of eating animals, and actually being held accountable, right? Versus, you know, sitting around with your friends and being like, isn't it kind of messed up we eat animals?
Right.
Yeah, but it's natural. Yeah. Versus someone's like, no, but that's still not a good reason. You know what I mean? And I think that has a lot to do with it as well. You know, it's a lot of these people's first times ever getting any kind of pushback, getting any kind of resistance.
100%. That actually reminds me of a story. And this is kind of to like the distal. So that was like the proximate. That was the thing that I was like, this happened and then I went vegan. You know, but that what you're saying reminds me of these more like distal, like the distant things. So there was like three things I can remember that basically happened. One was, and the one that really sticks out weirdly was just sidewalk chalking. At one point, me and my girlfriend were walking around some city, and it was like a pig is roughly as smart as a 3-year-old child.
Yes.
Didn't even have a source on it saying that. I never even checked the source to see if that was actually even true. But like, I think there was something in it that was like, the deeper point was just like, pigs are smart. They're not fucking idiots. They're not automatons. You know what I mean? Yeah. And for a while after I saw that, we stopped eating any sort of pig flesh. So we didn't eat bacon stuff. Really? It was probably for like, I don't know, maybe like 3 to 6 months. Right. I was just like, oh yeah, we shouldn't do that. You know? Now again, I ate everything else. Right. Of course.
But still, it's crazy to make a stark change, you know, based on one event.
Yeah. And just think how long that took that person to chalk that, like 5 seconds of chalk that like probably spared like a decent amount, you know, of pigs during that time. And then possibly softened me towards the vegan message later. You know, you never know like how those things are. So yeah, sidewalk chalk kids, like could help. That was one thing. Another thing is that I had read a book by Peter Singer called Practical Ethics. So that's not animal liberation. This is another book by him. And he just like I don't know if it's in passing or maybe there was like a short chapter on it. He mentions stuff about animals there and like the argument for it. And so I was exposed to that philosophical argument during that time, you know. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I think he makes good points. But I kind of had my own points and like they weren't like addressed in the text there, you know. And so I was like, oh, that's like, it's good. There's something to think about, sort of thing. And then the final thing is that I play this game with myself. I think this is a very important game everyone should play. And it's called, in 100 years in the future, what will people look back at us and think, wow, we're fucking assholes. Oh, sorry, I don't know if I can curse on this.
Go. You've already done it like
Have I?
You've already done it a ton. So.
Sorry.
No, it's cool. No. I just gotta get to your level.
So so yeah, so I always play that game with myself. And one of the things is it seems to me, or sorry, it seemed to me at that time, like clearly we wouldn't continue to eat animals, right? Like I'm connecting
Yeah,
it to other things. It
exactly.
just seems like, it seems at least discordant with the fact that we have dogs, you know? Um, and so that was something I thought about. And I brought it up to my friends before, this had to be really close before going vegan, actually, because yeah, I'm just thinking of the timeline of like what house I was in. And we're out back with like 6 of our friends, and like I posed that question because I was like, I wonder what people will say, you know. And they were like saying like, what people often will say is they'll say like an obvious issue at the time. They'll be like LGBT stuff, right? And it's like, yeah, that probably will, hopefully, fingers crossed, you know, or
Yeah.
something like that. But it's like I wanted the things that like aren't so obvious, like that aren't like an obvious political, like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
right
yeah.
thinks this, left thinks this, something else, something like deeper, something more like, you know, unconsidered. And I floated that idea. I was like, I think that, you know, like eating animals it'll be like really weird if we do that in 100 years. Actually, that would seem
Yeah.
strange to me. And like people were like, really, you think? Like they were like pretty skeptical like at the
Really?
time. And I was like, yeah, I do think. I was like, you know, and so they were like weirdly skeptical to me, you know.
Okay.
And you know, obviously I probably made some points then about like how during like this time of slavery, people also probably didn't think 100 years
Yeah.
from now it would be gone, you know, just because I
Yeah.
like to argue. Uh,
No, yeah,
and
totally.
so that was like that was like another thing. This was another thing too. Like so, actually now I'm remembering a bunch of stuff. It's kind of interesting where like
It's all
I
coming
was like
back to you.
playing with
Yeah.
this idea throughout my whole life. You know, it was when Michael Vick got like convicted for dogfighting back in the day. And I'll tell you, I'm someone who like has very, or at least previously had very little empathy for animals. Like I don't know if you ever
Yeah.
remember those Sarah McLachlan commercials where they show all of the like sad dogs who haven't been adopted. Like do you remember that? Might be before your time. I was just going to ask you.
Before my time. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. Maybe if I heard the
Yeah.
music, is it really like if I heard the song, right? There's
Yeah,
a
it was
song,
like
right? Maybe I
something in
can
the
kind of
arms of
imagine
an
that.
angel.
But
Yeah.
anyways, don't let me stop the anecdote.
So, um, so yeah, like I would be able to watch that and just like stony faced sociopath, like don't
Yeah.
care.
No, totally. Yes, yes, yes.
And other people around me were like, oh my God, like they're like, I can't watch those. I'm crying. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And so then, you know, this Michael Vick thing comes out, and like my mom and dad were like sitting around. They're like, did you hear this? Like, what a, I'm just going to curse some more.
Yeah.
Like, what a jerk. What a, you know, expletive.
Yeah.
And I was like,
What a piece of
exactly.
shit.
Yeah, exactly. That's, yeah, right. What a piece of shit. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird, isn't it, guys? Like, I mean, like
Yeah.
we eat animals all the time. Obviously, we're killing them. I don't even know if
Yeah.
dogs always die in a dog fight. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so it seems like, you know, and also like how much dog fighting could he possibly be doing? Like, we eat like I'm sure we eat way more animals than he dog fights, you know. And I said that to him, and I wasn't arguing for animal rights at that point. I just like
Exactly.
I'm just obsessed with like consistency, and so I want to try to like
Yes.
invest. Like to me, this is like an invitation to investigate this because this is it's a weird inconsistency we have. So why do we have it? Right? And dude, it was like shut down immediately.
Yeah.
They did not like that. Like,
of course,
they were just like, they were like, that's ridiculous. So,
welcome to veganism.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. How could you? What you think that's the same thing? Like blah blah blah. And they were just like, they were so unopen minded at that point. Like they were just so closed off. And in all those things, even like when those people were like, oh no, I don't think like, why would that be a thing in 100 years? Or my parents shutting it down, right? Or me only reading about it in a book, but no one else talking about it. You know, it speaks to this like the social setting you find yourself in is incredibly important. And had there just been like a little more curiosity, or maybe like one vegetarian or vegan in the group who was like, yeah, I actually think that because XYZ, you know what I mean? Like, had there been that extra permission, right?
Yes.
Because I'm the person kind of like, even in general in our friend group, I'm the person like pushing the edges of conversations. Like,
yes.
Whatever is the accepted wisdom, I'm pushing against it a little. And then even at every level of granularity, like the accepted wisdom, like in the country, but then like, what's the accepted wisdom in our friend group? And so then I'll push back the other direction on it. You know, this is what people call playing devil's advocate. And I know a lot of people hate that, but yeah, I will tend to just like kind of push around the margins and just kind of see like what people are thinking.
Yeah. But then sometimes you stumble upon crazy stuff like veganism. And yeah, I totally see where you're coming from. And I relate with that a lot too, honestly, with my own friends, I feel like I was always the one that was saying things like, well, what about this
Yeah,
though? Or
yeah,
like, what about, have you guys thought about that? Wouldn't
yeah.
it be crazy if we did this? And something that you reminded me of is, you probably heard of the ash line
Yeah,
experiment?
conformity test. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there we go. Well, for those of y'all who don't know, basically it's this test where they had a bunch of people in the room. They basically gave them a couple of lines, like 3 lines of different lengths, and they gave them a fourth line. And they said, this fourth line is the exact same size as which of the 3 lines? And the answer was totally obvious. And they were supposed to answer in order. Like say there's like 6 of them in an order. They answered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 had been instructed to give the same incorrect answer. And 6 was just to give the answer that they thought was correct or whatever. And what they found time and time again is when all the people gave the wrong answer, that last person, they felt so pressured to give the same answer as everybody else. Even if it was clearly wrong, they just kept doing it. And what they did find, interestingly enough, is that when they just had one other person in the group give the right answer, then that person would have, like, their chances of saying the correct answer shot up. And it's like you said, it's kind of have that other person to be like, what the fuck is wrong with these people, right? Like high five, like what, these people are crazy, man. But yeah, having that solidarity with someone, it can make a big difference. And that's actually something that guides me. I don't know how you feel about it, but it guides me with being vegan too. It's like, dude, if you're just that one person, you can be that one person in the room that other people can look to and be like, okay, you think this too? And it's like, yes, dude, I've been thinking it. We've been thinking it, you know? So
100%. Yeah, that second part of the ash line experiment is often left out of the experiment. It's a very crucial part. So like, yeah, like they have 5 Confederates in the experiment that say, oh yeah, that obviously long line is short. And so you as the 6th person, you're like, okay, I guess that one is short, you know? But it only takes one. It doesn't take everyone switching over for you to say it. One person is enough for you to start being, okay, motherfuckers, I knew that wasn't right. Like I knew that one was wrong. You know? So.
Dude, they've been able to get people to say dogs are cats with that. Like I read it.
Really?
I don't know if you've read. Yeah, I don't know if you've read Nudge.
Yes, Nudge is great.
Nudge. It's a chapter in that book, and they mentioned that on one part that like even they've gotten people to say dogs or cats. And I'm like, damn, dude, people will say anything. But that's the power of the group, right? And it's also the power of the what's it called? The person who doesn't belong. What's it called?
Like the maverick or the rebel or the
rebel. The power of the rebel. Yeah. So a lot of psychology that goes into people's decision
and it makes
processes.
sense too. Like I think as a way of being empathetic with those people who aren't the ones who are pushing the boundaries. Like remember, we evolved in relatively small groups of humans. Getting kicked out of that group of humans was tantamount to death most of the time. If you were ejected from the tribe, then like you didn't have, like here you get ejected from your friend group and society's still all here. You still have a grocery store, you still have houses, you know, obviously it's very painful. But our brains were built in a time when that wasn't the case. And so going with the rebel is an incredibly risky proposition. There's very little upside and potentially a lot of downside for you, at least in your like sort of deeper emotional brain, you know? And so like that's what we're up against, you know? And so when you're doing that, you want to be whatever that means. And, you know, we don't know exactly how to do this yet, obviously, but you want to be sensitive to that biological need for like social safety, you know, and psychological safety. And I think that's why, you know, why I think some approaches are better than others at like convincing a particular person. You want to give them that psychological and social safety, right? And the way you give them psychological safety is to be, you know, to ask more questions, to let them sort of express themselves, and you're like kind of doing so in a non-judgmental manner. So yeah, and then social safety that one's a little tougher. We're trying to figure out how to, you know, build clusters of social. I did a study on it, and there's a book called Change. If anyone wants to read the book Change, I highly recommend it for us. I also did a video, and I can send you that video as well. But it's like it's a really good way, really good book that analyzes how to get social change ignited and spreading. And it has a lot of counterintuitive conclusions. That's what makes it so interesting. Like the things you typically think aren't the things that are necessarily most effective. So.
Yeah, but they'll drive change. That's interesting. Yeah, because in college I studied. I did some like I studied decision processes, and some of the books we read were Nudge and Influence by Dan Ariely.
Influence is Cialdini.
Did I mess that one up? Which Dan Ariely? He wrote one too. But anyways, the point is like, yeah, just thinking about things that we can do to help push change along that we might not otherwise consider.
That's interesting to me, actually. Now that you're saying that, like, I do wonder when people have experience with psychology and like the biases and like these like sort of hidden motivations for our reasons for doing things. I wonder if it makes them more likely to go vegan? Because it seems like there's a resonance there when you start, because it forces you to question like all your autopilot decisions. It's like, okay, why am I actually doing this? You know what I mean?
100%. Exactly. And I also worked in marketing for a bit too. And, you know, when you're thinking about, you know, people like to think that, oh, I'm in complete control of everything I do. Like I have total autonomy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, the amount of tests we do in marketing to be like, all right, well, if we just like frame it this way, then 10% more people click. And, you know, how we exploit people's autopilot tendencies, right? To have them make different choices, which can amount to thousands and thousands of dollars when we're talking about money. So yeah, you're right. It does make you think like, wow, what are the decisions that I'm making that I'm not really thinking about? So one time Earthling Ed and Nimai Delgado, they had this podcast. It wasn't as good as this one's going to be, obviously, but they mentioned, I think Nimai Delgado said it, something like all the ideas that we inherit, you know, and not necessarily questioning the ideas that we inherit. And I love that framing. And it makes sense, right? Like there's thousands of years of people. For good reason, we pass down a lot of ideas and, you know, best practices. But some of the stuff isn't so great. And it's like you were saying earlier, like, what am I missing? And I don't know if that's how you feel, but with veganism, it was just such a mind fuck. Like it was such a mind fuck where I'm like, I can't believe like I've been part of this and I haven't even given it a second thought. Yeah. And it's something that's so violent, so evil that most people are 99% of people are so against. And you're like, and I was just doing it, no problem. So it really does make you think like, what else am I, what else is out there?
100%, 100%. It's funny. There's this phrase. It's a little reductive, maybe a little insensitive. I think it's funny though. And it says, culture is just peer pressure from dead people. And thinking of it that way is such a hilarious reframe of it. And it does kind of open you up a little more to like, yeah, you're just basically getting peer pressured by your like great grandparents to do X. And it's like, let's reevaluate if this cultural practice is in fact valuable in its own right.
Totally.
You know?
Agreed.
So yeah, but I agree with you too. It's like veganism was, it's hard for like, once you go from not vegan to vegan, it is hard to describe to other people how profound an impact that is on you.
100%.
Like I remember it was actually with the same group of friends on a different occasion. And they were like, wait, what do you guys think? Like, what are like the top like 3 most meaningful experiences of your life? You know, and I listed going vegan as one of them. And like, people seemed like very confused by that. You know what I mean? Like the look on their faces was so like shocked. And like, these people know I do activism. I know they've seen my videos, you know what I mean? But it's like, it doesn't land for them just like how, and even like almost even take the victims out of it. And it was still one of the most profound moments of my life, just because of that sort of realization of the grip that that culture and your upbringing have on your mind. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So yeah.
Yep. I completely agree. I mean, that resonates so much with me. It's so hard to explain to a lot of my non-vegan friends or even to connect on certain levels with them, because there's just this huge missing thing that it's so hard to explain to them, because they're like, okay, but I don't get it. Veganism, yeah, animals, but like what? So what? It's like you're on the other side of a door. Yeah. And the way I always describe veganism is it's like like our generation's biggest moral blind spot. You know, everybody's against violence. Everybody wants peace. Everybody wants, you know, to do kumbaya or whatever. And then 99% of the people walking down the street are directly involved in bloodshed, brutal killings. And they don't think about it. And it's normal. And if you dare say anything against it, you're the crazy one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
So it is world shaking and earth shattering. And the revelation, like you said, is, it's for me, I agree. It's one of the most profound changes that I've ever made in my life. And you know, it's funny. I was thinking about this the other day. Sometimes I think about veganism and how it's shaped my view of ethics and morality. Or a lot of people will say morality is subjective. I wonder how much of that solely comes because of treatment of animals and is used to justify treatment of animals. Because I'm trying to think, in what other instances are people okay with people saying that, you know, like that's the only case, because you hear it all the time. You hear all the time, you know, morality is not even in just vegan context. Like, but 20 years ago, right, when I was studying or whatever, 10 years ago, you would hear people talk about like subjective morality. And I'm starting to think, like, did that just become popularized because of people having to deal with like facing the fact that we eat animals and what goes into eating animals? Because for me, like, I feel like veganism shaped the way that I see things. And for me, like, morality is not so subjective anymore. It really just comes down to, if I were in their position, would I want that to happen? And how would I want to be treated? act accordingly.
Yeah.
That simple. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I won't go down the whole rabbit hole of like the meta ethics of objective and subjective morality, but this is what has always sort of made me laugh about that. Even prior to going vegan, the whole like morality. Whenever someone said morality is just subjective, here's what when I see people doing it. When people are doing something that they're being questioned for, they'll say morality is just subjective, right? What I don't see, like when they're eating an animal, oh, morality is just subjective. When they're doing something heinous and then maybe like putting a veneer of something else on it, like culture or religion, and saying, well, it's the culture, it's the religion, this heinous thing. Morality is just subjective. I've never seen someone like rescue someone from a burning building, have someone come out and be like, wow, you're so great. That was such a great thing you did. Such an ethic. And they go, well, no, I mean, I can see why you would say that, but morality is just subjective, right? Why don't they say it then? I mean, if they think morality is subjective, why not say it then? Like,
yeah,
you know what I
yeah.
mean? And so like morality is subjective to me, while it can be an interesting philosophical discussion, 99% of the time is a thought terminating cliche. It's a thing meant to shut down the conversation and say, you cannot say anything else here,
Exactly.
So,
but yeah, it's one of those things that you say where it's like, agree to disagree.
Yeah, agree to disagree. That's a perfect one.
I'm done here. The conversation's over. Or I made this comment in my like Christspiracy video, but it's like, you know what? God told us to eat animals, so
God said it was okay.
That's basically it. So
it is what it is.
Finito.
That's another common one.
It is what it is.
What it is. Like
it is what it is.
Like, it's a personal choice is actually a thought terminating cliche too, I think. Because like it's another one where like you just put it in another. I'm like, okay, what if someone killed someone? And they'll be like, no, that's different. That's not what I mean. And it's like, well, what did you mean by it? It's a personal choice. You didn't mean anything. You meant fuck off. I don't want to talk about this anymore. That's what you meant.
Yeah, literally, exactly.
But you just wanted to say it in a more polite way.
Exactly. So. The corporate 101 speak.
Exactly.
By the way, do you work in corporate?
100%.
Like, are you in corporate America?
I'm a corporate boy, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
We can take that conversation offline. I'm just kidding, but that gave you away. It
is what it is.
Yeah. Offline. No, saying offline. Earlier you said offline. We had this conversation offline. That's a dead giveaway. Yeah.
Interesting.
People don't say that in the streets.
Damn it. See, and I hate the corporate world. I try to like not let it like infect me, but it still gets to me. Yeah. We'll circle back. I didn't say circle back. That's the one that
circle
like,
back. Yeah.
Yeah. Just shoot me. Shoot me if I say circle back. Wait, do you also work in the corporate world?
I did. I was in corporate for I was in corporate for like 5-6 years. And so that's all there is to say. It's just like it's just fucking terrible. One reason that I feel so passionate about making vegan content is because I feel like, especially at least in corporate America, there's so many people that I feel like would be open to the message. They tend to be more left-leaning when it comes to things like Black Lives Matter, LGBT. Everyone wants to be really inclusive, talk about diversity, talk about women's initiatives. And then for me, like veganism is just a logical extension of like being inclusive of, everybody or everyone. Or people care about the environment, people care about their health. I didn't ever meet a single vegan in corporate America. Never. And I thought, man, maybe my content will resonate with them because, maybe again, like foot in the door with the environment. A lot of the times when I make content, I think, wow, like I wish there had been someone who had shared my background, who I might have listened to more. And again, even though my experience in corporate America when it comes to veganism wasn't, what I expected it, I wonder, like we talked about earlier, if there is just like one person, maybe I'm not in corporate America right now, but if I can come from that same background and be like, hey, like I also, I worked in corporate America, or more importantly, I feel like people in corporate America sometimes will think, oh, like we're very data driven, or they'll feel like, we come from this background of education. And a lot of times vegans get portrayed as, oh, they're just these hippie people who, they don't know what they're talking about. They're just people who weren't successful in life, and now they're just trying to cause problems. I mean, I don't know. I've literally heard people say that about vegans. So I'm trying to create this like persona that's like, well, actually, I sat in the same chair as you. I sat in the same office as you. I replied to the same emails as you. I want to go on the same vacations as you. And this is still what I want to do. And this is why I think it's important. Maybe if you won't listen to them, maybe you'll listen to someone who's more like you. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to the social thing, right? Like people are going to listen to people who are more like them. And then they also want to know that there's other people like them who are doing a thing, right?
exactly.
If you're a corporate boy, you're like, oh, I'm a corporate boy. Like that's my identity, and I want to keep that identity. So if going vegan, if there's no other corporate boy, I'm just going to keep saying corporate boys. If there's no other corporate boys who are vegan, then if you go vegan, you're really risking something, right? It's going to be hard. You're going to be like, how do I maintain this identity while bringing this into it? You know what I mean? But if you see there's a bunch of other people in corporate who are vegans, well, now I don't necessarily have to give up this. I don't know who wants to hold on to their corporate identity. I don't understand it, but you don't have to give up your corporate identity because there's other vegans who are also, you know what I mean? And so like, this is one of the things where like, where we talk about tipping points, where you've got to get to 25% of the population or whatever.
Yeah.
But like, it gets easier as you go up because you're just going to have more people who fit a bunch of boxes that another person can be like, oh, that person looks like me. They think like me. They work the same place I did.
Totally.
So
yes, exactly. Standing on the shoulders of giants, giant vegans.
It is so funny to me, like, the idea that like vegans are just like this like uneducated fringe who are like totally led by their emotions. And maybe it's a filter bubble for me because of the content I make. And so like the kind of people that attracts, but like it's so many people who either like sub to me, follow me on my Patreon, like this guy that I just did an interview with, like people in my local area, like so many of them are highly educated. You know what I mean? And even like a lot of them highly educated in like science. So like lots of like data analysts and computer programmers and, biologists and things like that and engineers. And it's just like, it's so funny to me to hear that stereotype because it's so ludicrous, at least based on my own anecdotal experience in the world, like dealing with vegans,
I mean, totally. And I think it's more of a, what's it called? I think it's more of a feature, not a bug. I think obviously like if vegans are portrayed that way, even if it only represents a small percentage of us, it's easier for people to dismiss us. And that's certainly how it was for me. You see people dressed alternatively and I'm like, oh, well, I mean, I'm in my button up shirt and my like khaki pants. And I'm like, well, that ain't me. And so it's very easy for me to just be like, brush them off. Even if, like you said, like we can be engineers, we can be, architects or whatever. I didn't say architect. That was just
you could be an architect.
Mathematicians. You could be as well. No shade.
That's actually what I wanted to be when I was a little kid. When I was in middle school, that was my original dream, was to be an architect.
An architect, like designing buildings.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I was very into art as a kid. Drew a lot and stuff. So. Yeah.
Gotcha. You turned it all in for activism.
Yeah, well, I turned it all in for science first, and then activism. Yeah.
So actually, on that note, like, how did you get into activism in the first place?
This is funny because like
what
my memory is a little bit hazy in this realm because it kind of happened. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be an activist. It was like I had wanted to start a YouTube channel, kind of because like what I was alluding to, like I don't like corporate life, and I was like, I would like to do something else. Maybe I could make a career out of YouTube. And so I started a YouTube channel and made like, I don't know, maybe 15 videos on it. And they didn't do that well. And so I was like, well, okay, maybe this isn't doing so well. Maybe I need to like pivot. Yeah. And so I made this channel, Debug Your Brain,
Oh, okay. Okay.
There's another channel floating around on YouTube.
Yeah. Share it with us.
And so I was like, okay, maybe I need to pivot, do a Debug Your Brain thing. And I started making videos, and I had a bunch of different kind of content I wanted to do. I was going to do some political content. I was going to do like maybe science. I was going to do like psychology. And then I was also going to do veganism. So when I first started my
and philosophy, right?
Yeah. So like when I first started my channel, the first channel I had, I wasn't a vegan yet. And then at some point between, I think that first channel and the second channel, I went vegan. Okay. I started my second channel, and so I did like 3 or 4 videos, I think, and they were on different things. One of them was like talking about Dave Rubin, like he was making arguments against science, and they were just like science in general. And they were just terrible arguments, and so I did a video on Dave Rubin. Yeah. And I did one on Ben Shapiro, and what was that one talking about? It was, I think it had to do with tribalism in some way, some sort of psychology. I did one on veganism, featuring Destiny talking about veganism. And then I did something else. I think one on rationality rules and and Hitchens Razor. And so I did them, and like the Ben Shapiro one did well and the vegan one did well. And I was like, okay, so maybe I do politics, maybe I do veganism. I was like, maybe I should just niche down. And I was like, okay, which of these is more underserved? Like, it's just the generic idea of like, cognitive biases and seeing our blind spots. I'm like, this has more broad applications, but also people are talking about this. There's books like Nudge, there's Dan Ariely, there's Kahneman, there's David McRaney I happen to like a lot. There's just a ton of content already in this, and it's fairly popular. And I was like, veganism though isn't popular. It doesn't have a lot of content. And based on what I've watched, there's a lot of there's just a lot of unaddressed questions to me. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. And I was like, well, maybe that's what I should do. When I think about how do I do the most good? One of the things I think about is not just what produces a lot of good or what's a good thing to do, but that other component of underservedness. And I was like, well, veganism is massively underserved compared to all no one's talking about this. And it's 100%. So strange. And so I was like, well, okay, I'll 100%. Make vegan videos. Now at that point, I wouldn't consider myself a vegan activist. I was a YouTuber who did vegan content. It's kind of interesting. At some point, I think, after having watched Ed's videos, I was like, hey, I was toying maybe I would go out. And then I saw Natalie Fulton did a video where she was going out and talking to people, and her production quality was obviously much lower than Ed's. She was just kind of out there shooting the shit with people, drinking. And I was like, oh man, maybe why don't I just do this? And she made a video about how to do activism. I was like, if you want to get out there, do this.
I watched the same one.
She was like, get out there and do it. And I was like,
shout out Natalie.
And I was like, yeah, why? Well, I'll fucking go out and do it. So then I went out and, I started doing it. And the first time I went out, it was very positive. I was watching Earthling, and especially watching, and at that point I had watched Joey Carbstrong as well, and it was ooh, I'm going to get people are just going to come up and scream in my face. And it's oh no, those are the exception, not the rule. Those are the exception that get on camera. Yeah. And, I talked to a bunch of very reasonable people. I even talked to random people came up to me and I was like, yeah, are you vegan? And they were like, no. I was like, okay, so do you eat pigs, chickens? And they're like, no, I don't eat any of them. I was like, oh, you eat eggs or milk? They're like, no. I'm like, you're not vegan though? And they're like, no, I had this coat for a while. I think it has down in it. And I was like, all right. I mean, this is my first time. I was like, do you do anything? They're like, not really. And I'm like, okay, so it seems like you're either you could get rid of that coat or some vegans say keep the stuff. I was like, I feel you could probably at least represent yourself as vegan adjacent or something. Normally people are going over the edge and being like, well, I eat eggs once a week and I'm still vegan. This person was almost going the other direction. Like someone had called her out once because and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And so my first experience was really, I actually put I think it was my first ever, or maybe it was my second of the day. My first ever outreach experience is online. I'm talking to this guy at Duke and it just goes pretty well. Overall, he's pretty understanding, pretty open, and so that sort of emboldened me. I was like, oh, okay, let's do this. And so then I just kind of started doing it more. I think the thing that struck me is I was like, these conversations seem to be going a lot better than all the conversations I see online. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was like, what's happening here? I don't think I'm doing that much different. And I still, I think there are some things I do that are a little different, but I don't think there's that much that I do that's different. And I'm like, I think they're just putting the ones that are more spicy up. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I was like, that kind of, and I'm even pretty pretty extroverted and stuff. I think that kind of gave me a little pause to do it myself. And I was like, okay, well, maybe it's better to actually just put up all these good ones and show people you can go out there and do this, rather than these ones of people yelling in your face where everyone's like, wow, that's crazy. I could never do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, let me just start putting up my outreach, which actually seems to be pretty positive, Yeah. And I had many people say that either my outreach in part or in whole was the reason that they're doing outreach now, or that there was a big influence on them getting out there and talking to people.
That's huge.
And so, yeah, I was like, okay, well, kind of mission accomplished. That's kind of what I wanted from doing this, right? There's a twofold thing, convincing the person in the street. That's great. But it, of course, doesn't have as much of an amplification effect as.
Of course. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. You got to put that on camera. You got to show the world.
Because now thousands of people watch it, right?
Exactly.
And what I was also noticing is, okay, YouTube pushes the stuff to people who are interested. Some places don't.
Yeah.
TikTok, well, I don't know what TikTok does now. TikTok back in the day would just shotgun it to literally anyone and everyone. But YouTube pushes it to the people who are really interested in your content. Okay, so if I do these all these interesting gotchas, right? It's just going to be other vegans seeing me doing gotchas or doing dunking on these carnists, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
if my stuff is mostly going to go to vegans, unless I get big, then it starts pushing it more. But if my stuff is mostly going to go to vegans, why not do something that encourages and helps those vegans become activists,
Yeah.
right? Like that's like,
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
me, a smarter use of my current position in the YouTube hierarchy, you know?
Yeah.
And so I was doing it with more of a lens to that sort of objective. And I think it worked. I mean, like I said, I had a lot of people reach out to me, and at least say they were in part influenced by some of my stuff I got out there.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. And I will say, like, it's been a while. I think it's been over a year since you posted an outreach
I
video,
posted one
but
like 2 weeks ago, but it was from a year ago. It was like an old one.
oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. But because I remember that, like, what was different about yours was you would post your thoughts on the
Mm-hmm.
screen. Something like, oh, in this case, I wish I would have done this, or I would have done this differently, or if you notice, this person's going to do this, and whatever, blah
Yeah.
blah blah. And that makes a lot more sense now from what you're telling us about how
Mm-hmm.
you were seeing it more from a perspective of you helping other activists or other vegans,
Mm-hmm.
get out there and interview
Yeah.
people. So that makes more
Yeah. I wanted
sense.
them too to see that like I like didn't think I was like hot shit. You know what I mean? Like I'm
Yeah.
constantly like questioning myself as well, and constantly unsure of
Yeah.
myself. And the fact that you're
Yeah.
questioning yourself or unsure of yourself, that's no reason to not do activism. Anything worth doing, you're going to
Yeah.
question yourself and, have doubts.
You got to,
And you
yep.
just got to push through it. We're all in it. We're all in it together. We're all feeling that, and so like there's dual purpose or multiple purposes. One is to like, give people like a little more to analyze too. Like maybe reflect on your activism a little more. I don't want,
Yeah.
some people have said like it may be causing people to overanalyze, which is a fair criticism. But what I mostly saw is people not thinking about it so much, just going out there and like parroting the same, 7 things.
Yeah.
And so I wanted people to maybe kind of think about more like the form instead of just the message, instead of just regurgitating the
Yeah.
talking points. There's other things you can do that aren't the message itself that makes for a better, more productive conversation. And so part of it was that, So
Right.
yeah, there's just like multiple things, I guess.
And it feels like you're touching a little bit too on the, it's not necessarily what you say, but it's how you make people feel,
Yes.
kind of thing. There's more than just the words. There's the information that comes out.
Yes.
How do people remember the conversation?
100%.
Maybe the ways that you made them feel, or the ways that you made them think. I kind of wanted to go back to the crop dust video that you're so famous for, or I guess you made a couple of.
There's 3 of them.
Videos.
There's 3 of them.
Yeah. What got you to the point of actually putting that video out?
Well, part of it was that myself, Chris Hines, and Vegan Gaze, they were talking about they wanted to make a really big, like super in-depth crop dust video. And I was like, cool. I was like just in the process of making one. I really want to address this. And it was that thing that I was telling you about, because I was seeing it crop up that people were like, oh, what about the waste products that animals eat? You know what I mean? As a response to the crop dust, as a response to the objection to the crop dust objection, right? People were starting to bring up this waste thing. And it was so ludicrous to me because literally where the number comes from, it comes from a paper where in the abstract, literally in the next line, it says that thing about animals like take 3 times the amount of, feed or whatever.
Yeah.
And so like, it was just so funny to me that this piece of information is running around when you can literally look at the source material, read one sentence down and see it like, so it was a combination that it struck me as being so obviously misused. So obvious, so easily debunked. Like, and the other thing that's interesting is usually when there's a debunk, it's like this paper says this is me interpreting the paper, or this is me like referencing another paper that's better. But this was all contained within the source itself. And so I just thought that was such like a fertile ground to be like, no, this is
low hanging fruit.
And then the thing so I was like, oh, I'm going to do this. And then the next thing to that is people say, well, what about, animals that don't eat like crops, like soy and corn, without they eat grass. And so I kind of had in my mind, I was like, hey guys, what I'm going to do is I just kind of want to make this first video and maybe a grass-fed video, and then we can integrate that into this larger video we want to do. However, once I went down that path, like I was just going to address that one thing. But then I was like, oh, here's this person, like the sacred cow lady on Joe Rogan. So like maybe I need to talk about that and like what her deal is, because that actually adds a little more texture to the understanding of the whole situation. But then I also was like, well, who wrote this paper? And then it's like the woman who has been like the livestock development officer at the FAO for the past however many years, you know. And then there's also like pictures of her standing with these like people who are very obviously industry shills, which again, you can stand with someone. That doesn't mean you're, you know, that doesn't mean you can't do good research or whatever. But what I was doing is I was like trying to think of like, what is each of the things that people are going to say, right? They say crop dust. I say they actually eat more crops. They say, well, those are just waste products. I say, actually, right here is the thing. They say that now this is that paper, right? So then what are they going to say next? What's the next rationalization? Well, the next place is to go is, well, that paper was actually funded, like who wrote that paper? That was like maybe like a biased vegan source, right? So again, that would be a weird contradiction because it'd be like the paper that you originally cited. But that's where people are going to go because I've seen this happen. So I'm like, well, who did write the paper? I'm like, oh, the livestock development at the FAO, who like has like these ties to industry and like is like buddying up with these people. Okay, so I don't even have to make the case that she would be doing a bias study against vegans. All you have to believe is like, is that person going to do a study that is biased towards veganism? Almost certainly not. Like, I don't even know what the argument is there.
Right.
And so I kind of was in my head. I was like, okay, well then people are going to say, you know, you said it takes 3 kilograms of feed to get 1 kilogram of animal. So what would they say next? They'll say, well, kilograms of food doesn't equal calories. Maybe the caloric density is low. Oh, okay, so I went into that. Then people will be like, well, it doesn't. Calories isn't really what matters, bro. It's protein. It's protein. So I go into like the protein thing, and it's just like, and so I kind of like, this is what I try to do. I try to think of each, and I even, you know, I read on other subreddits and I look at past debates and stuff. And so I just kind of go down and just like systematically dismantle each piece. So I started with that kernel of an idea, but then when I started writing, I was like, well, I probably should say this. I probably should say this. I probably should say this. And then it turned into like an 18-minute video. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so then the question is, well, shit, how do I make an 18-minute video watchable? And the only answer I've really found is to put a lot of time into it. it's like, you know?
Yeah.
So,
because I mean, like, how long did it take you to make that video? Or like, how long? Obviously, you don't remember the exact numbers, but just like, can you walk us through what it's like? Because I was watching that video and I was like, holy shit. Like, you know, the script writing, the thinking about what you're going to say, the research, like the brainstorming, the editing, the actual filming, like it's so much. I can't imagine the amount of time that went into that.
Yeah, it's borderline traumatic for me to remember it, honestly.
Yeah.
So making and that video was the shortest of the 3, just so people know. There's one that's 27 minutes and one that I think is like, oh God, I don't even know. Was it 34 minutes? It was like, I did 3 of them. And that was the easiest one. So I think that probably took me, I want to say that was like 6 months overall where I just released those 3 videos, maybe a live stream or something in between there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And again, like the research and the writing, a lot of it I could have done, you know, in a few weeks, but the filming and then the trying to keep that video rolling so people will watch it.
Totally.
Because like the thing is too, it's not like a 30-minute video where I'm like, Ben Shapiro said this, and then I'm like clipping like parts of the interview, and then I'm like giving my thoughts, and like people watch 30 minutes of that pretty easy. But this is like philosophical, scientific, and mathematical arguments all stacked on top of each other.
It's like a lecture, right? It's like a lecture.
And so it's like, and I get that that's not the most entertaining thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like I'm understanding that from a human perspective. And so like, it was tough because it was tough to be like, I really want to write this, but I also know it's not super interesting just on an inherent level. And so that's really what took all the time. You know, it's like getting the script took a while, and also making sure I kind of like had all the sources and things like that. But then like the editing process is brutal because I'm trying to get clips from a bunch of different like shows and movies, and then, you know, like flashing the proper things of the studies up on the screen. And it was just like,
I know, it's crazy.
I mean,
I'm really impressed. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I appreciate it. But yeah, it took a while. And like, man, even in those like last couple of videos, what I really wanted to do, like, I want to get anecdotes in there, like, from like farmers and like, you know, like news pieces and things like that, because I can show the data and the general whatever. And those things, okay, here's what I say. Those things epistemologically should be more convincing to people, and those should hold a higher weight.
Yeah.
Do they? Most of the time, no. I feel like most of the time people are really convinced by anecdotes. And so it wasn't just getting the studies or like citing these sources or like agriculture extensions. It was like, okay, now can I find YouTube videos where people are talking about it in a more like down home sort of way, you know? And so then I was trying to get all those, and then that takes some time, you know? So,
100%.
although not as much time sometimes as you think. Like I was like, okay, using pesticides on cows. You know, I mean, I was like,
Yeah.
because I was reading about that, I was like, that's weird. I never thought they would put pesticides on the animals themselves. You do a YouTube search of that, man, you got a ton of videos of people like putting pesticides on animals. You
Okay.
know, I don't know if you saw that one. That was like one of my grass-fed ones where I talk about like, oh, okay,
No.
you should watch that one. Yeah, those are like almost
Uh,
even crazier than the Joe Rogan one. But because like one of the talking points after you say it takes more crops is people like, what about grass-fed cows? They don't eat crops. This is the whole like I killed one cow a year. Some people say one cow a year, which is really silly. Some people say two. But
Yeah, I kill one cow a year. You kill billions of
yeah,
animals. Yeah.
right. And so like I was there was I did this is where like I was even going to do one grass-fed video, and then I realized I had to make it two because there's two different points to address here. One point is,
Yeah.
do we count these deaths the same? Is this of the same moral consideration? Okay. And so I did
Sure.
one video that was like that, that was looking into, are these deaths morally equivalent? But then I did another one that was like, well, is it even actually causing less deaths? Because that's like the intuition, right? Is that like, oh, if I'm plowing a field and I kill like 3 rabbits, well, 3 rabbits is more than a cow or more than 2 cows, you know? And so I was like, well, does this actually like hold up upon inspection? Like, let me learn about, about livestock farming, right? Which was really boring to learn about. I hated it, but I was like, this is what you got to do, I guess, right? Especially if you want to make content that's like new and fresh, but particularly content that exposes people to something that they haven't been exposed to before. You know what I mean? That's what I'm after. Like, and so I wanted people to have some knowledge that they didn't have prior to this. And so like that's what I did. And well, I'll actually walk you through a couple of the arguments here then, if you haven't seen it, or if people haven't seen it.
Hit us.
So like one thing is that people imagine like these cows, on this beautiful pasture, and they're just roaming around and just nibbling on grass. You know what I mean? And then they they'll show like 3 cows on grass, and then they'll show a picture of like a combine rolling through this like endless field of monocrops. You know what I mean? And they're like, oh, this is so terrible. But like one thing that I always point out to people, and this is like a mathematical, little bit of a nerdy thing, is that you have to like look at things per capita, right? So like when you see this giant field of soybeans that like goes on for as far as the eye can see, and then you see like a picture of 2 cows in a grass field, right? If we were to like equalize that, 2 cows is about like what you would have to eat a year if you ate nothing but cows, right? So you see those 2 cows and you see this huge field, and you're like, well, that looks way more impactful environmentally. Until you realize that the picture of that field of soybeans you see can probably feed like 600 people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's like, so now you have to go back to that picture of the cows you were looking at and multiply it by 600, right? So now imagine 1,200 cows on this giant thing. And even that is misleading, because even if you were to like look at like a field where cows are like grazing on, right? Those cows have to eat something in the winter. They have to eat something during dry periods. It can even get too wet where the cows can't graze properly. And depending on where you are for 2 months, 3 months, even maybe up to 6 months a year, they have to eat like something that they can't graze. And so what do they eat? Well, they eat like legumes, they eat hay. Hay is basically just grass. And so that grass has to be grown somewhere else. So that's even more land. And what happens to that grass? Okay, it's also mowed down. You know what I mean? And so when you're saying they're crops, if what you mean is growing something that has heavy machinery that goes over it, then yes, cows, even grass-fed cows, are fed crops. So that's like one thing. But the grass fields, they can also be sprayed with pesticides. They can also be fertilized. Not as common to spray them with pesticides, but they can be. But the thing, like one thing I found out that was crazy was that the animals themselves can be sprayed with pesticides. I have a video of a regenerative farmer,
interesting.
And he has like a power hose. He's like power washing his cows, just spraying them with like pesticide. There's another person has a paintball gun. They're driving around with a paintball gun. The paintballs have pesticide in them. And so they're just driving around shooting their cows with a paintball gun. And the cows don't like if you ever been shot with a paintball gun, it fucking hurts. It stings.
Yeah, no, it's not nice.
So these cows are like running around so not only is it just like very cruel to be riding around shooting cows with a paintball gun, but then you're also putting, pesticides on them. So like, yeah, it's interesting. Like when you dig into these things, it's like, okay, so even this claim, I don't, even if grass-fed cows cause like less crop deaths in the short term in a myopic way, I don't think that would be a good enough reason to eat grass-fed cows. And I go into that into like a long video myself, but But it's
Yeah.
not even, it's not obvious to me at all that there's a less deaths like with the crop deaths that cows cause. It's just not obvious at all. So yeah, that's what the video was.
Yeah.
It was kind of a long video exploring
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And plus, it's like you said too. It's like the drawing the equivalence
Mm-hmm.
too between the like deaths of one versus
Yeah.
the other. From multiple people,
Mm-hmm.
I've heard like, oh, if you want to talk crop deaths, like you got to go to Debug Your Brain. Debug Your Brain's got you
Yeah.
covered. And like it hasn't been once. That's why that's why I called you the
Yeah.
guy who's debunked, or the vegan who's debunked Joe
Yeah.
Rogan. Is that something that you
No.
want to be known for? And when I messaged you about it, you were like, oh, is that what I'm known for? So
No.
my question is that something that you want to be known for? If not, like, what do you want to be known for?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really want to be known for crop deaths. I don't know. It's like, I think I'm so over crop deaths now. It's like, because I took so much time on it, I just felt like there wasn't this like really nicely cataloged argument of crop deaths. And I wanted to make that. And I think even probably like, if I was just thinking about the growth of my channel, I think it was probably to the detriment of the growth of my channel. Had I spent those 6 months, I could have put up, what is it? At least probably 24 outreach videos. I probably would have gotten more subscribers from putting up 24 outreach videos. Like if we're being honest.
Yeah.
Again, like what I want to do is if I put an outreach video, now there's tons of people doing outreach videos. You know what I mean? Like I can just find endless ones of like small channels doing outreach, which is all because of me.
Obviously.
But like I can't find these other kinds of videos. And that's, by the way, that's not to like denigrate them doing outreach. I think it's great. I want there to be tons of outreach. But like I am looking like in the same way that with veganism, I was like, let me do something that's underserved. Now in the vegan community, I'm trying to keep that up where I'm like, okay, can I do something that's still underserved even within this niche?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what the crop deaths was, I would say. It's actually funny because there was a video that Stephen Woodford, Rationality Rules. I don't know if you know him. He's Alex's buddy, actually.
I've seen him in like titles and stuff, but I've never. So I'm learning as you're telling me.
So he's like got 300 and maybe 50,000 subscribers. He does a lot of atheist content originally, but he's kind of dipping into other content more recently. So he was, like him and Alex were big channels I kind of followed. His channel I followed before going vegan, actually. Okay. Which is interesting now because I'm trying to think of how that might have fed into my original algorithm. Anyway, but Lifting Vegan Logic did a podcast with him, which was cool to see Lifting Vegan Logic on like this kind of like this other like larger channel. Stephen had made arguments about like being a vegetarian versus being like a vegan bodybuilder. So in other words, imagining a scenario where like a vegan bodybuilder ate so many excess crops that the amount of deaths they caused were equivalent to a vegetarian who ate like a normal amount of calories.
Interesting take.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so again, this was what like something I didn't see anyone actually address it. You know what I mean? I didn't see anyone actually go in and say like, well, here's how I would address this point. And a lot of times as vegans, we can just sort of like laugh off these things. And it's understandable because I think a lot of times it's so obvious that it's like cope, like it's coming from a place of like obvious coping. And so I was like, I think it's important to like actually explain why, you know what I mean? And so again, it was that similar thing, but he was talking about crop deaths in his, and I wanted to make this like point about crop deaths that I hadn't fully made before. And so I kind of used that video as a vehicle for it. And it's basically, it's kind of like talking about the moral equivalency. People will be like, oh, it's not a rights violation. It's incidental versus accidental. Things like that. These are all the things we can say. And I think that there is maybe something deeper and more important, at least to me. And so I was kind of making that point in that video. And the point I was making there, I made a bunch of points, but one of the points I was making was that how animals live in the real world is important and how they suffer is important. But what might be more important is how they live in our minds, because how they live in our minds will determine how they get treated in perpetuity. And so if we're eating, let's say we're eating grass-fed cows and there are less deaths, right? If that is the case in the short term, that there are less deaths, the problem is that we're still viewing them fundamentally as objects. And while that psychological kernel is in our mind, we're never going to actually liberate them, And so even if it's like myopically in the short term, it causes less deaths, this is not the path to long-term success, to abolition, to liberation. Right. And that was sort of the point I made in that video. And that's I think honestly the more important point about crop deaths. I think it's cool to go in and like just like tear the guts out of the argument like I did there.
Yeah.
But
From the mathematical perspective and everything. Yeah.
But I think that's the fundamental overarching truth here and like the big mover.
I love that. I actually had a friend who I was talking to the other day, and he made a really, I just love the way that he worded it. And it's you're touching on, and it kind of goes in the same route where it's like, well, would you eat like meat that you found in the trash because it doesn't create demand, blah, blah, blah. And he says, no, because it all adds to socially reinforcing the idea that animals are, commodities when they're not.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, I agree with you. It really comes, a lot of the times it comes down to that. Like, how do we view animals? How are we seeing them? So
yeah, 100%. And so in that video, because I knew like the audience that I was potentially going at, I also cited there's psychological evidence for this too. Because sometimes what people will say, again, doing the thing where I'm like, what will people say to this? When people say like it reinforces the idea, people will be like, yeah, I mean, I guess that's a little squishy. What does that mean, reinforces the idea? Is there any data to back that up? And so in that video, I also kind of go into some of that. So
wow, people will push back on that.
Oh yeah,
damn.
Oh yeah, man.
And so you used to be doing a lot of street outreach videos. Now you haven't filmed them as much. You seem to be doing more like talking head type video. What do you see as like the growth for your channel? Can you tell us a little bit about your short-term, medium-term, and long-term aspirations, if you even have any?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Because you sent me this question, and I was like, man, some of these I don't know the answer to, and this is one that I think is a little hazy for me. Like I said, I actually, there's a high probability I will go out and do outreach tomorrow. Okay. For the next couple of weeks, and I am going to be probably at this point going to the ASAP tour with Faraz Harsini, if you know him.
Yes, I do know him.
I want to do that.
What is ASAP tour? ASAP tour?
Allied Scholars for Animal Protection. Definitely support that. Anyone who's watching this, it's awesome. Dr. Faraz Harsini goes around to colleges and he tries to get these chapters started that are animal rights chapters. Because a lot of times chapters will start at places and then kind of fade away. But he starts the chapters and then they provide centralized ongoing support to try to keep these things sustainable, basically.
I have seen that stuff then. And Natalie went with him once too, right? Is that the same organization or is that the same? Is the same thing?
And one of the things they do, they try to get like plant-based meal options in the cafeteria. So they're attacking the individual. They're creating like a little nucleus of activism. And then they are also going at systemic changes within the university.
I saw you said one about my university. Actually, I saw that. I wanted to like follow. I mean, I guess I should follow them and be like, hey, what's up, y'all? Keep going. 100%.
Do it. Because that's another thing that I've heard a lot. I did an interview with Faraz at one point, and I'm still getting people, and he's still sending me people who are like, hey, I saw that video you did on Debug Your Brain, and I started my own chapter here, and I started my own chapter here.
Wow.
And so another thing where I'm trying to I'm trying to niche down into those channels where to get people to actually do things. Part of the reason I stopped doing outreach was kind of like what I said. I saw a lot of other people doing it, and I was like, oh, let me shift to something where that's like less underserved. I will tell you, I was pretty depressed last year not clinically depressed. I'm using the term colloquially. But I was feeling pretty bad last year while doing those videos. Because, as you correctly identified, they were brutal to put together. They were really, really painful.
Yeah.
So I was like, I can't keep doing it. And I got like 2 more in the chamber I really, really want to do. But I've told myself I'm going to make kind of simpler videos for a little bit, and I'm going to do outreach. For my channel sake.
Yeah.
There's one I want to do on
for your own sanity. Yeah.
There's one I want to do on hunting and one I want to do on slavery. Cause that was the final pushback after I dismantled all the other arguments. Then it's like, well, what about hunting? And I've got an entire script written of hunting, debunking the whole hunting thing. It's not like one you've ever seen before. It's not like Earthling Eds or like these other people. I bring new things into it, and I want to make it so badly.
It's a 2,000 year cover up. I'm just kidding. You've never seen this before. Okay, cool. I can't wait.
I can't bring myself to film it and edit it and do another like giant, like 20-minute whatever.
Yeah. No, dude, I feel you, man. Like sometimes I'm watching those videos, I'm like, God damn. Cause I make videos too, dude. I'm like, oh my God.
I watched all 3 of them in preparation for this. I watched all 3 of them yesterday, just so I could kind of like remember like what I said. And I had the same reaction. It was like me watching someone else's video. I was like, Jesus, this dude put a lot of time. That's like way too much time to put into that video. So
dude, you're like pulling from all these different channels. I'm like, oh my God, this man. I'm like, does he have please, dear Lord, tell me he has an
I
editor.
do
Like,
not. I need one. I need
oh
one. I
gosh.
do.
But those are some sweet editing chops,
Thank you.
by the way. I couldn't do that if I wanted to.
Yeah, I don't. A lot of people say that. That's interesting to me. Like a lot of people have like complimenting my editing skills, which thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't know. I just like watched like I did a Udemy course or a Skillshare course at one point on it. And
Say no more. What's your
yeah, I know.
referral code?
I'll hit you with it afterwards. But yeah, I guess it must have leveled up my game because a lot of people. David Rams said that to me actually, and I feel like David Rams like knows a lot about like filming and editing.
He's got really high quality stuff too.
Yeah, so I was like, oh wow, that's like very. It felt. I feel like I was maybe bringing back that artistic side of me that I left in middle school. You know, to the science thing. You know,
it's a good point though. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I was gonna say on a side note, I feel like making content is a way to I don't know, lets you bring out a lot of your unique skills that you might not be able to apply in your corporate life. Like that's how I always felt. I always felt a little bit hamstrung by my corporate job. You know, they always teach you, you know, you're in school and they're like, well, if you learn this, like if you learn French, that might be good for your corporate job. And it's like, when? Never. Like this has never been useful ever. You're like, and then I've actually done a street interview in French like once or twice. Or I've done it maybe like once or twice. Yeah. So I was like, bam, putting it to the test.
That's actually a really good point. Like corporate life to me, corporate jobs are incredibly easy to me from like actually like executing like the task you were hired for. And people be like, oh, this is really hard. And I'm like, I guess, but compared to like doing like outreach and YouTube and like activism, like it's like, to me, it's a joke as far as the difficulty level. Like playing life, like corporate is easy mode. Yeah. Like this is hard mode.
It's almost like, I don't know if you played any RPGs, but it's like in a corporate, you know, you got your quest log, you got your quest assigned, and you basically go from there. Versus if you're doing anything entrepreneurial, you're making your own quest. You know what I mean? You got to figure out what do I even need to do? So as sexy as it sounds, like I don't have an what's it called, a schedule. Like I can do anything whenever I want, but it's a double-edged sword for sure. And you got to figure everything out, absolutely everything. It's like you were saying, you got to be the actor, screenwriter,
editor,
graphic designer, marketer, editor, everything. You know, exactly. You're the talent, baby. But
people. I don't think people do understand it, and I that's kind of like with talking head videos. I think that activism, honestly, is probably easier to get into in some ways, like outreach for YouTube, than talking heads, because as long as you just go out and have a conversation with people, you can pretty much put that up on YouTube, chop it a little, but like it doesn't take that much editing, like to chop up a
definitely.
But like if you really want to do like an essay or something, like it is going to take some like a lot of different skills, like you said, bringing together. I've had the same revelation as you, like all these things I learned in college, like, oh, you'll need this. I used like 3% of what I learned like in college in my jobs. Now I had some jobs where I used more because they were a little more sciencey. My job is still sciencey, but like not really. And so I've used it more in different jobs, but like the corporate world is, I think, by far the easiest job I've ever had. So I've I've worked in restaurants. I've been like a dishwasher. I've, what else have I done? I've done all kinds of shit. I've tutored, I've taught middle school. Teaching middle school is by far the hardest job, but like, it's exactly like you said. It's like in the corporate world, you're like, here's your quest line, here's your quest log, do these quests and you'll get here. And it's just like, it's so cookie cutter, and you just go in and like, generally people aren't even like assholes to you in the corporate world, like compared to other places. Like sometimes you'll get like passive aggression and shit like that. But for the most part, people are pretty professional. You just roll through your day. Okay. With like outreach, it's like, not only does it take way more creativity, way more self-motivation, you're writing your own quest lines, but then people are coming on being like, you're a dumbass. You're an idiot. You know what I mean? Like trying to rip you down at every corner. Same thing with teaching though. Like with teaching, you go in, and you're also kind of like, there's not exactly a quest log. You got to come up with your own plans, but then you got to like use all these communication skills to figure out how to talk to the kids. And then the kids are like giving you lip or calling you an asshole. You know what I mean? You bring their parents in. Now their parents are saying,
and they're brutal.
Exactly. Yeah. Middle schoolers are horrible.
Yeah.
Then their parents come in, and then their parents are yelling at you for their kid misbehaving. You know what I mean? And so like, there's all these like feedbacks in like these other sorts of jobs. And it's like, man, corporate is just like, it is soul crushing, but also easy. And like, that's its allure.
It's kind of the trade-off there, right? Yeah, absolutely. What is one thing you think most people get wrong about veganism?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. I don't know if this is so much that they get it wrong, but I'll tell you my sort of like journey through veganism and the way I think about it. I think even vegans get it wrong that when they go vegan, the speciesism has left their body. And I
Mm,
definitely thought that was the case for myself. Like when I went vegan, I was like, oh, okay, I have like ascended past this. I am no longer speciesist, right? I
yeah.
don't eat animals. I don't eat their secretions. I don't ride horses, go to zoos, et cetera, et cetera. But as I've gone along, I've watched the speciesism slowly leave my body more and more and more over
Yeah.
time. And it's just kind of, sometimes it's subtle things, sometimes it's more overt things. But I think one of the things we talked about was about how seeing animals as commodities is itself this bedrock psychological issue. And when I first went vegan, I definitely didn't see it that way. I was definitely looking at it only from the sense of like not killing animals and not causing them suffering. You know what I mean? And like, I
Yeah.
guess like, yeah, like, cause like if you rode a horse, that was causing suffering to the horse. If you went to a zoo, that was causing suffering for the animals. Like everything was viewed through that lens, or they were going to die earlier. I think that I wasn't recognizing that the commodity status itself was such a problem, or that I had such an asymmetry in the way that I looked at the commodity status of animals and humans. Because obviously I don't want humans to suffer, I don't want them to die. But even if if we started riding humans around on all fours and gave them very
Yeah.
good lives, and didn't kill them early, like there would still be something that fundamentally I felt was wrong about that. You know what I
Totally.
mean? And
Yeah.
while I recognize it abstractly as being like, yes, we shouldn't commodify them, I didn't feel it in my bones right away. And I think over time, it's not just that I recognize that we shouldn't commodify animals. It's that I now feel it in my bones more in the same way I feel it with humans.
Yeah.
And I definitely didn't feel that for like the first couple months I was vegan, maybe not even the first year that I was vegan.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that vegans get wrong about veganism, in the sense that their mind hasn't fully opened to,
Yeah.
because you just have this unconscious speciesism, this residue that clings to you. It
Totally.
doesn't, your brains don't work like that. Your brain doesn't just boom, yeet a pernicious idea over the course of one day, right? Like,
Exactly. And I feel like it's like that with any of these, again, going back to social justice movements. I would say I'm a
mm-hmm,
racist person and I'm a sexist person, not because I
mm-hmm,
want to be. And I'm not trying to
yeah,
be like, I'm not trying to get that clipped and be like, wow,
yeah,
he's a raging. No, but it's like we grew up in a sexist and
yeah,
racist place. When I, like in the going back to corporate world, there was a time where I had a female coworker. Whenever she would, say something or do something, if I ever noticed myself being like, oh, like, why is she saying it that way? Or she's being
mm-hmm,
bossy or,
yeah,
the
yeah,
classic things you go to, I'd have to like ask myself and I'd say, damn, if she were a man, would
right,
I say
yeah,
the same thing? And if no,
yeah,
I would, try to change the way that I was thinking. And so I think, and with racism too, like I find myself a lot of the times thinking about, how is race playing
mm-hmm,
into the way that I'm behaving and acting and maybe judging this person or the language
yeah,
that I'm using. So it's not like I'm
mm-hmm,
intending to be racist, speciesist, or sexist, but it's more of like you said, we're in the society, and it's not something that you unlearn
mm-hmm,
the next day. And that's why I always think it's silly when people say like, "Oh, I'm not racist at all. Like I have not
right.
a sexist bone in my body." And it's like, dude, if you're saying that, then you're definitely saying some fucked up shit because you're not thinking about it at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that. So I totally feel you. I totally
That's
feel
interesting.
you.
That because that makes me think back to our metacognition thing, where I was saying how like the people who get the worst grades are the people who have the worst metacognition, that they don't know what they don't know. Um, and I think that's probably a similar thing with racism and sexism, where someone says like, I am absolutely not racist in any way whatsoever. It's like just think how hard that would be. Okay, like that's not how your brain works. Like we grew up. Actually, I probably grew up in a more racist time than you. I think you're a bit younger than me. Um, I'm an
Yeah,
elder
yeah,
millennial.
yeah.
Are you like Gen Z? Are you millennial? You're
I'm
millennial?
millennial. Thank you very
Okay.
much. I'm 90. I'm
You're
30. I'm
30.
30
Okay. Okay.
years old.
Okay. So like
Yeah.
not too much later than me then, I guess. But yeah, like I definitely grew up during the 90s, man. And like if you want to see
Yeah.
what it was like growing up in the 90s for a white kid in America, there's literally a movie called, I think, That 90s Movie, and it captures it perfectly. And for
Okay.
people in this day and age in 2024 to go back and watch the 90s movie, like you will be horrified at like just the level of like homophobia and sexism that was just, it was just like an ambient thing. It just like clung to the atmosphere,
Yeah.
right? But like, okay, if coming up as a kid, every instance of a brown person you see is someone like, it's like the Simpsons, like working at a 7-Eleven, or Or like
Yeah,
every
yeah.
black character in every
Apu.
movie is like a token black character who just embodies every stereotype.
Yeah.
Your brain, even if you tell yourself, you're like, yes, I know that those stereotypes aren't true. You can't just tell your brain that and then boom, they're gone. That's not how your brain works.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like those things are deep inside you now. And so like you actually have to use some like cognitive effort to recognize and like address them, or like you were saying, like thinking about them. Like that's like a perfect thought experiment. Someone does something that's different than someone does something outside the dominant group and the dominant narrative. Rethink about that. If someone in the dominant group and the dominant narrative had done the same thing, would you think of it the same way? If not, then possibly there's some racism or sexism going on. It's a really good heuristic, really good like practice to do. But then, and because we do it all the time with animals, right? This is the thing we're constantly asking people. We're constantly saying like, okay, put that in the human context. Okay, put that in the context of slavery. Do you still agree with this thing? You know, and that's I think it's a really good practice to have just for virtually anything, but certainly all those isms that you just like highlighted there.
So yeah, the last question I have for you is, what are some misconceptions you had about vegans before going vegan?
I wasn't one of those people who was like, ooh, vegans are gross or annoying or bad. So I think that's maybe one thing is that I didn't really have. The main thing I had about veganism was that I didn't know if you could be healthy being vegan. And so that was my main worry. And I'll tell you where this worry actually came from. Back in the day, when I was coming up, I was like a little snarky atheist. And I listened to Sam Harris, and he had made, I guess he was vegetarian for a while, and he made a like detour into veganism for a while. And he was like, you know, I tried veganism and, you know, I just didn't feel quite right. I felt like I needed meat. So I went back to eating meat or fish or something. So I felt better, you know, and I couldn't find any way to troubleshoot it. And, you know, at that time I was like, this seems like a smart dude. It doesn't seem like he's really lying. It seems like he made a genuine effort. And I'm just like, okay, well, like if he couldn't do it, man, it seems like there's a real worry there, you know, and that was my only touchstone for it because I hadn't, you know, looked into it any more than that. And so I think that was my biggest misconception was A, that you could be healthy. And then the corollary or the related thing is just like, I then thought it was going to be really hard to be healthy. And it was just like, has not been hard for me to be healthy on veganism at all. And so that this is one of those things where it's like, I'm sort of flabbergasted by like how hard I thought it was going to be compared to how hard it is. But yeah, as far as veganism, I didn't really have too many misconceptions. I've never even been one to be upset with people evangelizing. Like I was an atheist for a while, or sorry, I am an atheist, but I was an atheist since a young age, and a bit of an outspoken one at first. And then people were like, yeah, you know, all these like Jehovah's Witnesses coming up to your door and people like evangelizing. And I was like, I actually don't care about the evangelizing. Because if they think they're right, it's rational to evangelize. If they think that you're going to hell for eternity, it makes sense that they would come up to you and be like, bro, do you want to like burn for it? Like, no, you don't. It's like I'm
doing you a favor. I'm saving your life.
It's like my issue is with their beliefs, their epistemology, and you know, the way that they acquire evidence and interpret evidence. That's the problem I see. But I don't like if vegans are evangelizing veganism, I don't think that's a bad thing. Yeah, so I didn't have a problem with the evangelism of veganism, per se in any way, or vegans. So
cool. Well, I think that wraps up all the questions I had for you today. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today on my channel. And is there anything that you wanted to anything you wanted to plug, anything you wanted to talk about?
I think we covered most of it. Yeah, just like I said, again, my YouTube is Debug Your Brain. My IG is Debug Your Brain. I have a TikTok also. I don't post as much on there, but yeah, if you want to contact me, usually just reaching out to me on IG. Sometimes I'll respond on there. Sometimes I won't. But yeah.
He's a busy man, everybody. He's a busy man. But all right, well, make sure everybody to go follow Debug Your Brain. If you don't get it, follow him on Instagram and YouTube, and help him out on TikTok. And so thanks so much again for coming on, Justin. See you, everybody.